A man turns an Aurora T-Jet over in his hand. The whole underside of it is motor, and the motor is smaller than his thumb. Fewer windings mean less torque. That is the rule. Aurora broke that rule in 1963. They stopped using paper. The patent says it in one line: no more than 0.02 of an inch. That is the whole secret. How do you make a motor thinner without making it weaker? By 1965, Aurora had sold more than 25 million HO slot cars. They ran on plastic track in American living rooms, and nothing else came close for a decade. How they did it is not in any catalog. It is in a document filed with the United States Patent Office on the 27th of February, 1963. The applicant was a plastics company in West Hempstead, New York. 3 years later, it was granted, and almost nobody outside that factory read it. There is one more motor in that document, a version built so it would barely wear at all. Nobody ever made it. This channel is for machines built better than they had to be, and for the paperwork that proves it. Subscribe, and the next one finds you. 0.02 of an inch. Nobody outside that building could see it, and nobody inside could afford to lose it. The reason is sitting on a hobby shop shelf in 1963, in the box next to this one. Everyone assumes the stronger motor wins. It is a reasonable thing to assume, and it is wrong. In 1963, the same year the T-Jet appeared, a rival came at Aurora with a motor of its own. Tyco built it to lie flat in the chassis instead of standing upright. It was simpler, it made more power, and it lost for more than 10 years. The usual explanations are money, price, and shelf space. Any of those buys a season. None of them buys 10 years, and 10 years is a generation of boys walking into the same shop and lifting the same box off the same shelf. What decided it was not on the balance sheet. It was the shape of the car itself. The body of a slot car is a little copy of a real car, and real cars are not tall. Whatever went underneath had to fit under that roof. There are 2 rides at every county fair that do the same thing. A Ferris wheel stands on its edge and turns, and it needs a great deal of sky. A merry-go-round turns as well, but it lies flat, so what it needs is ground. Same motion, completely different room to do it in. A motor is the same problem. The part that spins is a coil of wire, and it has to spin somewhere. A motor laid down turns its coil like a Ferris wheel, and it eats height the car does not have. Aurora stood the motor up instead, so the coil turned flat, like the merry-go-round. That freed the 2 heavy magnets out to the nose and the tail, and handed the whole width of the chassis to the coil. The patent puts it without any drama. The housing is relatively flat, it says. It spreads out the diameter of the motor, and it allows for the reduction in height. Width they had. Height they did not. And every piece already in that little box was there for a reason. Nothing was spare. So the height had to come from somewhere nobody was looking. Everyone who owned one of these lost the same part. Not a wheel, not a body. A spring small enough to disappear into a carpet and stay gone. And everyone who owned one broke the same clip. The track came in sections joined by little white plastic staples, and one leg of the staple always went first. 60 years later, men still remember which leg. The world these things lived in was a Saturday morning. A kitchen table too small for the layout, so the track ran around the legs of the chairs. A boy of 10 with a car light enough to lift between 2 fingers. The ritual never changed. The car went down into the slot, 1 finger on the roof, pressed until the thin metal shoes underneath touched the rails. Then the finger came off, pressed too hard, and the spring was gone. A man who raced these still remembers losing one, then another. The afternoon stopped being about racing and became a search on hands and knees. What followed was a negotiation with a mother about a ride to the hobby shop, and when there was no ride, 2 brothers did what brothers do. They took the slower cars apart and fed the pieces to the fast one. One of them called it the best toy he ever had. He was not being sentimental. He was ranking it. None of them knew what they were holding. The thing that made this car win was sealed inside a molding nobody had a reason to open, and it stayed sealed for 60 years. Almost nothing about how this was built was written down. One document speaks, and it speaks in the flat voice of a patent clerk with no idea he is describing something remarkable. Inside the motor sit two thin plates of soft iron stacked. They carry the magnetism, and the trade had a rule. The plates must not touch each other electrically. Something has to go between. For decades, the answer was paper. A sheet of insulating paper, cut to shape and laid between them. It worked, and everybody used it. Paper has a thickness, not much of one. But in a motor that has to fit under the roof of a toy car, a thickness that can be measured is a thickness that cannot be spared. So Aurora took the paper out. In its place, the plates were dipped, the patent says, in a coat of insulating paint, somewhere between 1/1000th and 2/1000ths of an inch thick. It is the difference between wallpapering a room and painting it. Both cover the wall. Only one of them adds something a hand can feel. And then the chain runs. A thinner coat means a slimmer plate. And the patent says the next part out loud. That reduction also cuts the overall thickness of the wire windings wrapped around it. Less winding, less motor. And it drops under the roofline, which is the only place it was ever going to fit. A margin bought back from a can of paint. It is the smallest decision in the machine, and it decided everything above it. Which leaves the strangest line in the document. The plates did not have to be two. One would have worked. The patent says so outright. So why did a factory that had just gone to war over a coat of paint add a second piece of iron it did not need? The document is blunt about it. A single armature lamination, it says, can be used in place of the two. One plate works. The factory used two anyway. The reason it gives is one line long, and it is not about electricity at all. By the use of two laminations, less distortion is encountered in the assembly. Distortion in a factory means warping. The document does not explain how two plates warp less than one. It reports that they do, the way a man reports weather. What it also does not say is what a warped one costs. For that, the people to ask are not engineers. They are the men who have been racing these things for 50 years. A racer strips an armature down and counts the turns of wire off each pole. Then, before soldering it back, he weighs the poles against each other and takes wire off the heavy one until they match. He is balancing it. Nobody does that for fun. They do it because a spinning part that is even slightly out of true fights itself on every single turn, and a motor fighting itself is a slow motor. That is the answer to the strange line. The second plate was not waste. It was straightness, bought in metal, by a factory that had just spent everything it had on taking thickness out. Twice now, the answer has come from a place nobody would think to look. That is not luck, and it is not one clever engineer having a good afternoon. It is a habit, and habits leave marks. Habits are the hardest thing to find in a record. An invention gets a patent. A habit gets nothing. Nobody writes down the way a place decides things, because to the people inside it, that is not a decision. It is just how the work is done, which is why almost everything about this factory is gone, and why two lines in a patent are worth more than they look. They are not the invention. They are the habit, caught by accident, because the law happened to require it. And the habit is this: when something has to get smaller, the obvious move is to take part of it away. This factory kept doing the opposite. It left the thing alone and changed what was wrapped around it. There is a version of this in every house. A room that needs to be bigger does not get bigger by moving a wall further out. It gets bigger when the wall itself is made thinner. Nobody in that plant would have called it a philosophy. They would have called it the only way to get the thing built. But it is a philosophy, and it is about to show up again in the one piece of this car that everybody has held and nobody has looked at. Everybody who owned one of these has held the piece. It is the plastic body of the chassis, the part the wheels hang off. It looks like the cheapest thing in the box. Most small motors of the era could be taken out. A can, a case, a unit, unbolted and lifted clear. There is no such object in this car. Anyone looking for the motor will not find one. The magnets, the spinning core, the contact plate, the brushes, each one drops into a hollow molded into the chassis itself. The chassis is not the thing the motor sits in. The chassis is the motor. One molding, and the document lists what it is doing. It is the case that holds the motor together. It is the frame the wheels bolt to, running the whole length of the car. And because the plastic does not conduct, it is the insulation, no separate part needed. The fourth job is the one that matters 60 years later. The metal shaft of the spinning core does not turn in a bearing. It turns in a hole in the plastic. The patent says the housing provides bearing surfaces for metal parts without lubrication. Without lubrication, no oil, anywhere in it. Nothing to dry out, nothing to gum up, nothing to go sticky in a shoebox in an attic for half a century. This channel has told the story of an engine that threw its oil away every second it ran. This is the opposite answer to the same problem, reached in the same decade. So far, every choice in this machine was forced. The space decided it. But there is one thing the space did not decide, and it throws power away on purpose, at every single tooth. The power leaves the spinning core at the top of the chassis, and it does not go straight to the wheels. It goes into a gear. That gear turns another. That one turns a third, on a shaft of its own, which turns a fourth, and only then does it reach the crown gear on the rear axle. Every one of those meshes costs something. Teeth rub. Friction takes a cut. A factory that had just fought a war over a coat of paint built a powertrain that gives some of it back at every tooth. They could afford it, and the reason goes back to the shape. Standing the motor up had left the full width of the car for the spinning core, so the core is larger than it has any business being. The extra pull it makes more than covers what the gears take. But the gears were not just a cost, they were a dial. The document says the sizes of the gears can be modified to suit conditions as desired, and it spells out which way the dial turns. A bigger gear on the motor and a smaller one beside it gives a car that pulls harder. The other way round gives a car that runs faster and pulls less, which means the thing on the shelf was not a default. Somebody set that dial before the box was sealed. Every car that left that building carried a decision about what kind of car it would be. And that is where the document stops being useful. It says what was decided. It does not say who decided, except at the top of the first page, where it names 2 men. The patent names 2 men. The first is Joseph Giammarino of Rockville Center. The second is Derek Brand of North Merrick, 2 towns on the same island about 10 minutes apart. Giammarino was not a hired designer. 13 years before this patent, he and 2 other men started a company in Brooklyn. He was the engineer of the 3. It did not make toys. It molded plastic parts for whoever paid. Toys came 2 years later, and when they came, Aurora won them the way it won everything, by being cheaper. Against the established kit makers, Aurora sold models smaller and less detailed than theirs, at a price theirs could not match. The early boxes carried a slogan that gives away the whole business in 4 syllables. U-Ma Kit, which makes the name at the top of this patent strange to find. The man who built a company on being the cheap one put his name on a document about a margin nobody could see. The second name did not come from Brooklyn or from Aurora at all. The racing system was not invented here. Aurora bought the license for it out of Britain, and the man who had drawn it kept working for them. And the first thing he gave them did not work well. The early cars ran on a vibrating mechanism, the kind used in a door buzzer. It ran hot. It came back to the shop. In 1963, it was replaced, and the man who drew the replacement was the same man who had drawn the fault. He did not walk away. He stayed and built the thing that made his own earlier work obsolete. The order of the names is worth one sentence and no more. On a patent, the first name listed is not automatically the one who had the idea. The record says who signed. It does not say who thought of it. This film is not going to pretend otherwise. Below those two names, the record goes quiet. No worker who pressed these plates was ever named. The archive of the town holds 7 items about this company, and in all 7, there is not one person. Why the iron has 3 lobes and not a round core, the document is silent. Who set the gear ratio, nobody wrote down. And there is no line anywhere explaining why the owner's name went first. Brand kept working. Years later, according to collectors who followed his career, he went to Tyco, the company whose motor had been simpler and stronger and had lost. In the 70s, he moved again, to what was then the largest toy development house in the world. And somewhere in the middle of all that, the same hands that drew this motor drew a parlor bowling game called Skittle Bowl. Most of the children who played one never knew the other existed. Derek Brand died in 2012 in California, a long way from the island where he drew this. The obituary published after his death gives the cause as complications of Alzheimer's disease. The man who designed a mechanism people can still read, 60 years on, ended his life unable to keep hold of his own memory. That is not a lesson. It is just what happened. And it leaves the paper. Because the paper remembers everything, including a motor that was never built. There is a paragraph in the middle of this patent that nobody has ever needed to read. It is not about how the motor was built. It is about a version of it that was better. The brushes are the part that wears. 2 small carbon blocks, pushed up by springs, dragging on the spinning contact plate every second the car is running. They wear. The plate wears. Eventually, the car slows down and then it stops. The document proposes a fix. In order to prevent wear of the plate and the brushes, it says, rollers may be substituted for the brushes. Small wheels instead of blocks. Rolling contact instead of dragging contact. And it states the result plainly. This would eliminate a substantial amount of wear on the commutator plate as well as the rollers. Not less wear, substantially less. In a machine whose only real enemy is wear. Nobody ever built it. Not in 1963, not in any of the 9 years the car stayed in production, not in the 60 years since. Every one of the tens of millions that left that building went out with brushes. The document does not say why. It offers the better version and then walks past it, the way a patent does. Whether it was cost or tooling, or simply that nobody upstairs read that paragraph either, there is no record. By the end of that decade, the men who started the company had sold it and gone. What happened next happened to a name, not to them. The patent itself ran out on the 5th of April, 1983. 17 years after it was granted, it stopped protecting anything. Anyone could build this motor. By then, nobody wanted to. 4 years after that, the rights were signed over to a company in Tokyo. The paperwork is on the file, a transfer dated the 30th of September, 1987. They were buying a patent that had been dead for 4 years, which means they were not buying the motor at all. They were buying the name on the box. One more thing sits in the file. When the rival company filed a patent of its own in 1980, this one appears in the prior art listed against it. The company that lost is there in writing, pointing at the thing that beat it. The building on Long Island came down in 2006. The local archive holds a photograph of it, not of the factory working, but of the factory being taken apart. So the record at the end holds this: a better motor that was never made, a patent that outlived its own usefulness and was sold anyway, a designer who lost his memory, a factory that exists in one picture, coming down, and not one name of anyone who did the work. That is everything the paper lost. it is not everything that survived, because the thing itself did not go anywhere. There is a trade in these now. The rarest of the spinning cores change hands for $85 and up, and the people who buy them have learned to be careful, because at that price, there is a reason to lie. So they check the contact plate. On the real ones, collectors say, the engraving is different. 60 years later, the way the factory made that part is how a buyer knows he is not being cheated. There are men who have rebuilt more than 100 of these chassis. There is at least one who will still repair one if it is posted to him. And when the designer died, his sons went through what he had left and began selling the prototypes, the versions that never reached a shelf, sold one at a time. And in 1999, a man who said he was a grandson of one of the founders tried to start the company again. He gave it a new name. He called it the Lost Aurora Plastics Company. He put the word lost into the name of his own company. It did not work, but somebody wanted it enough to try. If this is the kind of thing worth 2 hours of a Saturday, this channel does nothing else. Subscribe, and there will be another one. There is one thing left, and it takes about 4 seconds. Somewhere there is one of these with your name on the box it came in. What do the rivets on the underside look like? Solid or open? Collectors read those the way a date stamp is read. Solid rivets point one way. Open rivets point another. Whichever is there, it puts a rough year on the thing in your hand, and the comments below are full of people who can narrow it further. And the motor that was never built is still not built. No production car is known to have been made that way in all the years since. The one they did make is still running. A man who was 10 years old at a kitchen table in 1963 could pick one up today, set it in the slot with one finger, and hear the same noise. He never owned a toy. He owned the proof that somebody once made a thing smaller without making it worse, and did it so quietly that they buried the answer in a coat of paint. Thanks for watching. Subscribe, and the next lost machine will find you.